My distinct pleasure and honor to introduce to you tonight someone who I met at Harvard Divinity School back in 1973. So we've known each other almost 50 full years. And to be able to introduce Danny Sheehan to you tonight is truly an honor. Danny is a constitutional litigator. He was educated first at Harvard College, went on to Harvard Law School, demonstrated a brilliance in his studies that launched him on a career around the protection of human and civil rights in the United States that I would say, as someone who has observed history pretty closely, is without peer. Danny has been involved in virtually all the major cases that helped to shape American perceptions and protections around civil liberties, from the Pentagon Papers to Wounded Knee, to Iran-Contra, to Watergate, to Silkwood, to the Lakota projects, and now with his wife Sarah Nelson and people like Kit Bricka and others through the Romero Institute, is shaping policy even in the state of California to make possible an energy policy in alignment with natural systems. He's also been involved with the UFO phenomenon and has helped shape the Senate legislation recently around taking control of all the different aspects of UFO research and development of the entire U.S. government and beginning to centralize it into a congressional office. So when this man stands up, you can rest assured that you're going to get as close to the truth of what's going on as anybody out there. And in a world that is post-truth, when it's very hard to distinguish between fake news and real news, that is something that's worth more than pure gold. Ladies and gentlemen, Danny Sheehan.
It's always good to bring one of your best friends to have him introduce you. Robert Perella was going to do it, so fortunately I've got a few folks that have known me for a while, can let you know what we're going to be talking about tonight. So as you might have gotten some idea, that there are a number of different incarnations that I've had down through the decades. Over 55 years almost now since graduating from Harvard Law School and being out in the world doing public justice work. So there are different expectations that people may have as to what we're actually going to be talking about tonight. When we start talking about this cosmic moment that we find ourselves in. Jimmy Garrison actually did a talk earlier today about the confrontation in the Ukraine that's going on right now, which is, snuggling on up toward the edges of a potential nuclear showdown between the Western powers of NATO and Russia. That's a huge moment now because it's for the first time since basically the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962. You actually have serious discussions going on about the possibility of deployment and the use of nuclear weapons. So people might be saying, well, if you're going to be talking about kind of the major cosmic nature of the moment, you'd have to be talking about that. And that is one of the aspects of things that we would talk about tonight. Now, many of you, the older among you, may remember us as having established the Christic Institute in Washington, D.C. This was a major public interest law office that was set up by the Jesuit order, in partnership with the National Organization for Women, a strange enough alliance that we formed in order to do the Karen Silkwood case. And that was the case where the young woman that was played by Meryl Streep in the movie Silkwood back in 1983, multiple Academy Award nominations, directed by Mike Nichols, had Cher and Kurt Russell and others in it. And that was the woman who was killed while directly on her way to deliver documents to a New York Times investigative reporter. And she was murdered on the way to the meeting, and all the documents were taken from her car. As a result of that investigation that we conducted in that case, we ended up winning a $10.5 million judgment against the Kerr-McGee Nuclear Corporation, and a ruling that stopped the construction of all private nuclear power plants in the United States from 1979 all the way up until this year. And now, so that is one of the things that we've done. Now, also, that as you'll note here, that in the gathering here of the New Living Expo for this year in 2023, that a significant majority of the people participating here are women. And so therefore, one might expect that if I'm going to be talking about the extraordinary importance of this moment, I'd be talking about the Dobbs case of the United States Supreme Court revoking, a 50-year recognition of a fundamental right on the part of women to determine whether or not to carry to term a given pregnancy, unexpected, unwanted pregnancy, to force them to have to bear the child, even in the context of rape or incest. And as you know, that they've now passed a law down in Florida with Governor DeSantis signing it into law, prohibiting any abortion at all after 6 weeks. And as women know, there many times a woman doesn't even know that you're pregnant by 6 weeks. So that it's clearly an attempt to stop that fundamental right. Now, I was involved in an important way because I actually initiated and litigated the case of Eisenstadt versus Baird that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, that was cited as a major pillar of that Roe versus Wade decision, because we won the right of unmarried people to have access to birth control information. Back in 1970, it was actually prohibited for unmarried people to be given access to birth control information. That's how bizarre it was as of that point in time. And the reality is that the same people who have pressed the United States Supreme Court to take away the right of women to decide your own reproductive freedom are planning to go after contraception. They actually believe that the utilization of any type of contraception other than the rhythm method, which generates 10, 18 kids per family in Ireland, is something that they think is the only ethical way to control the number of children that you're going to have. So that I could be spending a good deal of time talking about the importance of this moment, not only for the revocation of that particular right, which is so fundamental, but the entire concept that a reactionary United States Supreme Court could start withdrawing from American citizens long recognized fundamental rights that go all the way back to free speech and freedom of the press and freedom of religion and others, that somehow they feel that they're authorized to withdraw these rights if the majority of the court feels that somehow they shouldn't still be operative. So that's an important issue that is salient as we gather here tonight, on the 15th of April of 2023. Now, also, there's another big major event that's just taken place that you probably know about, is that when we set up the Christic Institute back in Washington, D.C., I was the chief counsel for the United States Jesuit headquarters in their National Social Ministry office, going back and forth to Rome and meeting with the Superior General of the Jesuits in drafting public policy positions that were extremely progressive positions, prohibiting nuclear weapons, getting them the mere possession of nuclear weapons to be declared a mortal sin because they are intrinsically designed to attack civilian populations, which is a violation of the just war theory. We put out all kinds of policies, and one of them was, in fact, opposing the doctrine of discovery, the basic premise of a papal bull that was actually issued back in 1493, declaring that indigenous people were not humans, that they didn't have a soul. And therefore, the European culture was authorized to seize their land and resources and take them into slavery. And so that just now, in just a month ago, Pope Francis, the first Jesuit pope in the history of the Catholic Church, has renounced the doctrine of discovery, which is the underlying premise, legal premise, for the United States government to continue holding away from the indigenous people in North America the land that was seized and taken from them. So this portends a major watershed in the entire doctrine of indigenous rights in this country, and so that we could be talking about that as one of the definitions of the major cosmic moment. And I touched upon our Silkwood case. We have now, for the first time, through the Obama and Trump administrations, have now authorized the government insuring of private nuclear power plants. And so now, for the first time since 1979, you have the very first private nuclear power plant going back into production. First time since 1979. And so this is a terribly dangerous precedent because of the availability of the nuclear weapons materials that are generated by the private nuclear power plants for the proliferation of nuclear weapons and dirty nuclear bombs. So this is another threatening moment that we find ourselves in at the present time. But we're also actively involved in the Let's Green California movement that Jim Garrison referred to in the introduction. We have been successful at the Romero Institute in securing the passage of a major piece of legislation here in the state of California, Senate Bill 1230, the first of three bills trying to get us to zero emissions in the state of California. And this bill that's been passed into law and signed by Governor Newsom actually orders the integrating of all of the incentive programs, financial incentive programs that are available in the state of California for low and moderate income families to be able to get a reduced cost of purchasing electric cars. Okay, and so the fact of the matter is now people below a certain level of income in the state of California can almost have a subsidized purchase of an electric vehicle. And we're now in the process this year we've drafted and are getting passed Senate Bill 823, which is going to provide a charge card to low and moderate income people to be able to charge their electric vehicles if they get them at any of the charging stations that are going to be built throughout the state. So we're engaged in that kind of activity now, which talks about the subject of global climate change. Because as we know, every night you can see on the news, other big, huge chunks of the ice sheets breaking off in the Antarctic. And the records being set everywhere of the massive temperature changes on the planet, tornadoes everywhere, massive floods and droughts. And so that is also an extraordinarily important part. But the particular incarnation that I've had in the past and still maintain in the present is being the attorney. The 20-year attorney for the Disclosure Project that dates back all the way to 2001 when we brought together in Washington, D.C., 21 government officials, actually, and brought them to the National Press Club and had them all testify under oath about their direct firsthand knowledge about the reality of the UFO phenomenon. And I've been involved in it since then, and even before, in 1977, when President Carter was elected in November of 1976, one of the very first things he did is called in the director of the Central Intelligence Agency and demanded, as the president-elect, to be given all the information about UFOs. And that director of the Central Intelligence Agency refused to give him the information, asserting that he had no need to know. As the president of the United States, that particular director of the Central Intelligence Agency was George H.W. Bush, when he was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency under the previous President Ford. So I've been legal counsel from that point on when President Carter asked the Congressional Research Service, Science and Technology Division, to prepare 2 top secret reports for him. One on the potential existence of extraterrestrial life in our galaxy elsewhere, and also whether or not that was related in any way to at least some of the sightings of UFOs. And I was special counsel to that particular set of investigations, and in that context was given access to the classified portions of Project Blue Book, something that you may have heard about. That was the 1952 to 1969 top secret government study of the existence of UFOs. And as you probably know, it turned out to be just a major whitewash. They kept insisting that it was just swamp gas, or flocks of birds that had been mistaken, or a searchlight shining off clouds and it was mistaken. And so that history of the United States government, when pressed by we as the citizens to get access to the information about UFOs, which people were citing all over the country, flying around, we've been at this now for 75 years, trying to get them to give us this information. I served as legal counsel not only for the Disclosure Project, but for the citizens' hearings. We held public citizens' hearings in 2013 in Washington, D.C., and had former United States senators and congresspersons, take the testimony of over 40 witnesses to present the detailed firsthand knowledge information that they had about this, and videoed all those. That was Stephen Bassett, and made all of those available. They're available on the internet now for us. And more recently, I have been retained to be legal counsel for Lou Elizondo. Lou Elizondo was the 10-year director of the top secret Pentagon study on UFOs. And he resigned in 2017 in protest over the fact that he was being blocked from getting access to the information. The Congress of the United States allocated $22 million to the project to secure this information. And everywhere he went, he was trying to get the information, and they refused to give it to him, telling him that he didn't have any authority to get this information. Yeah, it was clear that the information existed somewhere, but he couldn't get it. And it turns out that it went all the way up to the J2, the Director of Intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who also couldn't get the information. And so they were trying to figure out, well, who is it that has this information? It's clear that somebody has the information, and so they're trying to figure out who's got this. And so that I have been involved now over the last couple of years to work on trying to get the United States Congress to pass a law to establish a new congressionally mandated office to gather all of the information about UFOs and the potential relationship of this to extraterrestrial intelligence, to see if in fact these vehicles that have now been determined to be, quote, under intelligent control, in a report that's been filed by the Defense Department, that these are real vehicles, they're under intelligent control, they respond to signal intelligence, and can avoid being encountered by our F-18 top jet fighters, and they can travel at this almost 20,000 miles an hour inside our atmosphere without any friction. And they can travel at 20,000 miles an hour and turn immediately at a 90-degree angle and come out of the turn just as fast as they went into it. They can come in at over 80,000 feet from space down onto the surface of our oceans in 0.7 seconds. And come to a complete abrupt stop, generating some 600 Gs of pressure that would totally liquefy any occupants of a vehicle at that point and totally disassemble the vehicle. But it has no adverse impact at all on the vehicles. And then they go underwater and travel underwater at over 100 miles an hour. And these have been sighted throughout the United States and around the world. And they've in fact been sighted over nuclear weapons sites. And they have actually turned off nuclear weapons. For example, in 1967, in Montana, a UFO came over the Minuteman site and turned off 10 U.S. nuclear missiles, each one independently wired, and shut them off. And when the command structure attempted to report this, to get this investigated, no investigation was undertaken. And they were saying, how can this possibly be true? How can the United States military and national security community not want to find out who's turning off nuclear weapons, right? Except that it wasn't happening. And so Lou Elizondo kept pressing on this, and he kept being struck by the fact that the command structure in the United States military and intelligence community didn't seem to consider this to be a national security threat for some reason. And he couldn't figure out why. And so he became totally frustrated, and he, in fact, threatened early on to resign. And what happened back in 2009 was the Catholic Church under Pope Benedict, not the most liberal of popes that have ever existed, that the Vatican convened a group of 24 world scientists, astrobiologists and astrophysics people and astronomers and others at Castel Gandolfo, where the Papal Observatory is outside of Rome. And at the end of that 1 week session, on November 11th of 2009, Pope Benedict and the cardinals authorized an official public statement. And they went actually back into the Vatican at the official press office and issued a statement saying, in light of the discovery of more and more of these new exoplanets, it has now become clear that much sooner than had been previously anticipated, our human family is going to come to realize that life exists elsewhere in the universe. And therefore, the time has arrived for the initiation of a very serious conversation among the laity about the profound philosophical and theological questions that are posed to our human family by the discovery of life elsewhere in the universe. Now, what I did upon hearing that particular announcement, since I've been in charge of the largest order in the Catholic Church of formulating public policy for the Jesuit order in the United States, that I contacted Father Jose Gabriel Funes, who was the director of the Pontifical Observatory, and flew to see him. And within a couple days of the issuance of the public statement, which he is the one who issued the statement from the Vatican, and within 2 minutes of the beginning of our conversation, he said, "Look, Danny," he said, "we're not talking here about the discovery of some single cell life form under some frozen sea on some distant moon in some other galaxy somewhere. We're talking about another highly intelligent and highly technologically developed, but distinctly non-human species right here in our Milky Way galaxy." Okay, and so that the time has arrived now for us to have this profoundly important conversation. Now, people can instantaneously kind of sense why it's important, but our job, those of us who are involved in government policy, have to particularize this in some way. Exactly what is it? What are the questions that we're going to have to answer? And how are we going to go about answering these? Because as you know, the fact that the Catholic Church has come forward now making this announcement, the New York Times has published on the front page of the New York Times on December 17th of 2017, a major article stating that these are real. The UFOs are real. They've actually released videos, 3 videos from F-18 Super Hornet jet fighter gun cameras showing these objects flying at tens of thousands of miles an hour inside our atmosphere and turning on a dime and flying away from our jets. Okay, and now the church has made the official statement. The Pentagon has made the official statement that they're real. The New York Times has made the statement that they're real. 60 Minutes, CBS 60 Minutes has held a whole major program about this, interviewing not only Lou Elizondo, my client, but also Chris Mellon, who was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence in the Carter administration. And you've heard now John Podesta, who was the chief policy person for the Clinton administration, state that the one thing that he regrets when he was in that position with the Clinton administration is he didn't take the steps he should have taken to make the government release the information that they have about UFOs. So what we have is a series of authoritative institutions in our human civilization, the New York Times, the Pentagon, the Catholic Church, the others, having now informed us officially that the UFOs are real and that they're anticipating discovering intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, and that therefore the time has come for us to have this important set of conversations. Now, this is a gathering of people that are more focused on consciousness and proper diet and health and other things than the issues of national security, state politics, and even, I think, UFOs. But there's a sense, I think, among people at this gathering that there's some kind of interesting relationship between consciousness and this UFO phenomenon, because the information that people have heard is that a significant number of people in the world have purported to have direct face-to-face encounters with these beings. Probably one of the earliest ones that you've heard about was Betty and Barney Hill back in 1964, that were driving along a highway up in New Hampshire, coming home from a visit up in Canada. We're on their way back to Massachusetts. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, spotted a vehicle flying along over the tops of the hills where they were driving, and saw it land in a field. And so they actually drove over and got out to look at this. And Barney Hill took binoculars out of the car and walked out into the field and looked through the binoculars. And he became terrified at what he saw. And he ran back and got in the car. And he said, "We've got to get out of here. We've got to get out of here right now." And they jumped in the car and started driving away. And as they got a mile or so down the road, all of a sudden they heard this beep, 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 and they turned and looked at each other like this. And then they turned and looked back at the road, and it was light out. And they were some 25 miles down the road from where they had been when they first heard the beep. And Betty turned to Barney Hill and she said, "Barney, do you realize where we are?" And he said, in typical male fashion, he said, "Look, I've driven this road 100 times. I know exactly where we are." Like as if that explained it. And they ended up becoming so distressed about all this that they ended up going to a psychologist who engaged in hypnotizing them and bringing them back to that evening. And they started to recall in great detail having been brought aboard the craft and having face-to-face met with extraterrestrial beings, the gray beings with the large head, the big dark eyes, and and the little skinny arms and stuff, and being examined, etc. And this began a whole new dimension of the UFO issue that had been going on from 1964 all the way back to 1947 with the famous Roswell crash, which I'm sure even though you're not necessarily specialists in this particular area of UFOs, that virtually everybody is familiar with now in the United States, of the crashed saucers in mid-July of 1947 that crashed at Roswell near the 509th Bombing Group, which was the only nuclear weapons squad in the entire world at that time. And they began to file reports that a saucer had been found, and the United States Army Air Force immediately covered it up and asserted that it was just a weather balloon that had crashed. And that was right around the same time that people started getting reports all across the country of having seen these. And it turns out that Colonel Philip Corso, who was the commander of the Foreign Technology Development Division of the United States Pentagon, reported in a little 8mm home video or film. Actually, it wasn't even a video. It was 8mm film. He filmed a statement to be seen by his grandchildren only after he died, which I was allowed to see, where he basically recounted to his grandchildren that he had been a security officer at Yucca Flats, where we were doing the nuclear bomb testing, all the way back in July of 1945. And he said that he was one of the range security officers, and he took a break for lunch and drove off away from where the site was, where they were preparing the nuclear test, and encountered a UFO. And beings from the UFO who communicated with him telepathically to please have them turn off the radar around the entire nuclear test range so they could flee without being picked up by the radar. And he did it because he realized that this was such a profound realization that there was an extraterrestrial civilization who were obviously here doing surveillance of us detonating nuclear bombs. And so this issue has been around since 1947, with a major Associated Press release that went out about them recovering a UFO. And this has been going on now for basically 75 years, until very recently, when we have actually broken through to have these authoritative institutions of our government and our culture confirm to us as citizens that, hey, look, UFOs are real, and all the investigations that have been conducted on the part of the secret government investigations of this lead the people who've been involved in those investigations to assume that the probability is that they are extraterrestrial. I actually sat in a closed-door meeting with Lou Elizondo, the head of the top secret project investigating these, with the leading editors of the Associated Press, and he told them face to face, he said, look, we've been investigating this for at least 10 years, and we have come to the conclusion that these are not some super secret United States project, because I would know that. I would have access to that. And they're not Russian, and they're not Chinese. He said, and the fact of the matter is, that we have been seeing this exact same technology all the way back to 1947, he said. And in 1947, just 2 years after the end of the Cold War, Russia, this is what he said to the AP people. He said, Russia in World War II had just lost over 20 million people in the war. And they were so poverty-stricken from the destruction of the war that they were tearing up rail lines that go from Russia into Europe so they'd have metal. So they certainly were not in a position to have this kind of super advanced technology back in 1947. And he said in China in 1947, he said their major means of transportation were ox carts with stone wheels. That's what he said. It wasn't exactly politically correct, but I think it was technologically correct. So they were just flabbergasted. And they said, well, look at it. They said, if they're not ours and they're not Russian and they're not Chinese, then where are they coming from? And Lou Elizondo said, well, those of us that have studied this, we believe it's probable that they're extraterrestrial. And the guy from AP said, extraterrestrial? Like as if he didn't even understand what the issue was. You know, I mean, after all these years, you have people in those positions of authority that, you know, are completely shocked. You know, they're more shocked the fact that any government official would tell them that. Okay? And so that's where we are right now. And so that that they've now passed this statute, I said, on December 23rd of 2022, basically on Christmas Eve, so no one would notice what they were doing. But they passed the law and signed it into law, and now they've set up this office. I don't want to go into too much excruciating detail about it all, because I have to sort of maintain your level of interest in it. So I don't want to get down in the weeds too much, but there's been this kind of tug of war going on between the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee. The Senate passed a bill, Senate Bill 4503. It was 13 pages long, and it was a full-scale mandate given to all of the United States military services, all of the United States Defense Department agencies, all of the intelligence agencies of the United States, and all of the corporate government contractors of the United States, that they were mandated by law to turn over all of the information about UFOs, any information they had or had ever been in possession of, all the way back to January of 1945. Okay? And so that's an extraordinarily important event took place. The Senate also put in a provision saying that anybody who has a national security clearance that enabled them to get access to that information ahead of time, that the fact is that they now were released from their national security oath for the purpose of sharing the information with the Senate Intelligence Committee, okay, who would also have clearances. So they didn't have to violate their clearance, but they had to tell these other people about it, okay? And it also said that very importantly, they said that if any person who attempts to share their information about the UFOs with the Senate Intelligence Committee, and they're interfered with by any other government official, that there will be a legal cause of action that person could bring against that official in federal court to find him liable for interfering with his right to communicate this information. You know, when I read that, actually when I helped write that, and they passed it. Well, actually, I was actually more involved in the one where they had previously had a provision in there saying that any person who was prepared to bring their information to the Senate Intelligence Committee had to first get interviewed by the FBI. And I thought that was a really bad idea. Nobody wants to talk to the FBI because the FBI has this special law that if anybody misrepresents any facts to an FBI agent, that's a criminal offense. And so nobody would want to talk to him. So I was involved basically working to get them to take that provision out of there, which they did. But Lou was very deeply involved in it, along with David Gorsuch. And Colonel Carl Nell, all of whom I've been talking with and dealing with. They were instrumental in getting this thing drafted, and I've represented each of them, as well as Lou Elizondo. So I've been monitoring what is going on there. And so what happened is the Senate bill designated the office to be set up as the Unidentified Aerospace and Undersea Phenomenon Joint Program Office. Now, the problem is that you couldn't dance to that. It didn't generate any whatever that is, of a nickname for it. And so when they shifted it over to the House side, for them to review the bill and decide what they were going to approve, they ended up changing the name of this. Now, the Senate had changed it from referring to UFOs because they thought that had too much baggage with it. Really, what it is UFOs are always associated in people's minds with ETs. And so they didn't want to do that. So they changed the name of it to UAPs, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, right? And that was what they were referring to in their bill. And it went over to the House side, and the House side changed it to Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon. And they changed the name of the office to you got to remember this one because it'll just roll right off your tongue, is the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which they call AARO, 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 the office is. It's cute, you can dance to it, but the problem is that it expanded the subject matter to be looked at way beyond just the UFO phenomenon. It deals with all kinds of stuff, poltergeist, ghosts, apparitions, Marian apparitions, all of that stuff. And you don't want to put the Defense Department in charge of investigating stuff like that. But what it does is it provides an excuse for the people that are in the offices to spend all their time trying to get information on that stuff to throw into the office and confuse them and obfuscate the investigation of the narrow issues that we're talking about here. And so that we have to be alert to this. And this whole process that's been going on here, the protests of Lou Elizondo, the move by Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, going to the New York Times and revealing these videos and all that, have been going on at the exact same time that the James Webb telescope has been put up into orbit. Not into orbit, it's into space. It's out at a centralized spot out in space now. And so you've been following that. It's like a 25-foot wide gigantic set of 18 mirrors that all fit together. And most people don't quite understand what the details are of this. This is a device that is, the temperature of this is like 235 degrees below zero. And so that there is like almost absolutely no heat generated by this vehicle at all. And therefore what it picks up is the heat. It's infrared. It's an infrared telescope that picks up the heat of stars and planets elsewhere in the universe. And so it is now been able to discern, as of July of 2022, it's actually discerned the existence of a galaxy that is over 13.6 billion years old. In the entire universe, they're anticipating is only 13.78 billion years. And so this is a galaxy that was actually formed only 350 million years after the Big Bang. And it is 33 million light years away. Okay? And so they're out exploring the very fringes of the physical universe now through this. And what they're doing is they've got the capacity to actually hone in on the actual exoplanets. The original discovery of the exoplanets, as you've probably read about, was discovered because they could tell from the Hubble telescope that all of a sudden the star that they were focusing on would dim in this tiny microscopic degree. And it would do so in a regular pattern. And they surmised that it was because a planet was going around that star, and therefore it was blocking some of the light. And that was how they first started getting excited about the fact that, lo and behold, get ready, there may be planets elsewhere in the universe other than in our solar system. Which, given the scientific method of the fourth paradigm, scientific, logical, positivist, materialist worldview, if they can't measure it, see it, weigh it, taste it, it doesn't exist. Okay, they don't take it into their reality structure. Okay, and so they began to say that, well, it appears that there may be planets, and so now the James Webb went up after the Kepler. The James Webb telescope can actually find those planets, focus in on those planets, and they're going to be able to, in effect, photograph the surface of these planets all through the galaxy. I mean, this is an absolutely astonishing instrument that's been put up there now. And what it means is they're going to be able to put through a spectroscope the content of the atmosphere in each of these planets to determine whether they have oxygen, whether they have water there, what kind of, whether there are any signs of life there, etc. And so this is going on right at the same time that this extraordinary coming forward on the issue of the UFOs at the same time that the planets are being discovered, and you will see. What that means is that the people in positions of authority in the national security state realize that there are two different pathways to approach this issue of the existence of extraterrestrial life in the universe. They can either hammer down on the UFO issue and say, well, look, they're not from here, they're from an extraterrestrial civilization somewhere. And so that's circumstantial evidence that they exist somewhere. But the problem with that one is that would suggest that they're here. in addition to being out there, they're actually here. And that raises a whole lot of trouble because if they've been here, then they have to worry about all these tens of thousands of stories of people who say, not only are they here, but I've seen them. And that I've encountered them. I've had communication with them. And let me tell you what they're saying. What they're saying is, you gotta get rid of nuclear weapons. And you gotta stop polluting your planet with burning all these fossil fuels. You're contaminating your entire ecosystem of your planet. Okay? And these are two things that have been said over and over and over again. And people keep reporting this. They have entire experiences where, like, for example, in 1994, Dr. John Mack, who I also had the privilege of representing legally, he was the chairman of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He's the guy that back when the Central Intelligence Agency in the Defense Department, every time anybody in any kind of military service or government office tried to report a UFO sighting, they would say, well, we want to make sure that this is credible, so we want you to go and get a psychiatric test so that we can say you're not crazy. But of course, everybody realized if they file a sighting, they're going to go to a psychiatrist. And so they are chilled and they don't want to do that. But those that insisted upon doing that were sent to get a psychiatric evaluation. And so the Air Force and the military sent them to Harvard University, to the medical school. And Dr. John Mack, who was the head of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry, ended up being the guy interviewing these people. And so after he'd interviewed a dozen of these fairly high-ranking military officials, and they all started giving the same basic account of what they had seen, of what these craft were doing and where they were appearing. At Rendlesham, for example, the Air Force Base in England, where one of them came and landed right in the woods, right next to the military base. Again, the only European military base with American nuclear weapons at the base. They showed up and landed in the woods right next door. And the commander of the base went out to see what this was, and they brought a tape recorder with them, and it exists where you can hear live coverage of them walking onto this UFO. And one of the guys actually...
It's audio, not video.
No, it's an audio. Did I say video? It's audio.
You said audio.
Yeah, it's an audio. It's an audio recording of their exact thing, of what they were seeing and hearing. And so these reports started coming in, and they were sending them to Dr. John Mack. And after John had interviewed a dozen or so of these guys, he was completely thunderstruck by, as he said to me later, he said, I found them to be totally within the normal parameters of psychological normalcy, except for the fact that they were military officers, he said. He said, but all that aside, he said, I was struck by this, and he started talking to his mother about this, actually, his like 90-year-old mother, and she said, well, look, one of the friends of the family, is Bud Hopkins. As a friend of our family, their son, Bud Hopkins, is very interested in this. He's a sculptor and kind of independently wealthy, and he's been collecting stories about these people who had these sightings. And so Bud Hopkins came to see John and started giving him more people who'd had these kind of direct encounters with the UFO beings. And John, 1994, he decided that what he was going to do is write a scholarly article about this. Now, he'd written dozens of scholarly articles. He'd, in fact, won the Pulitzer Prize for writing the definitive psychobiography of T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia. So he was a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, and so he put together this report about this interesting phenomenon, that all these different people were having these very similar experiences, and he submitted it to the New England Journal of Medicine. And they sent it back to him and said they weren't going to publish this. And so he was kind of taken aback, and he said, well, I guess I'll kind of redo it. I'll put in some more footnotes. I'll be a lot more scholarly about it. And he sent it back to them. And within 2 days, the executive secretary of Relman, Dr. Relman, who was the editor-in-chief, Arnold Relman, of the New England Journal of Medicine, she came to his office with the envelope unopened, and said, Dr. Relman wanted me to tell you that this has been unopened. We're not going to open it, and we're not going to publish this article, no matter what. And so John got upset about this, and he called a publisher and put it together and published this. And it came out in 1994. And within 3 days of the release of the book, the dean of the medical school at Harvard Medical School comes in to see John and said, John, this book that you published, I'm getting some calls here, and I don't quite know how to respond to them. I thought you and I'd have a conversation about this thing. It's kind of an interesting topic. And John said, well, that'd be fine. I'd be happy to do that. He said, and the dean said, well, as long as we're going to do that, why don't we have some of the other faculty people gather together, and we can have kind of a conversation about this. So he said, well, good, we'll do that. And so they set a date. He goes to the office to meet with the dean and these people. And here they are up on a tribunal. They've got a tribunal with several of the faculty members, all of whom didn't like him for one reason or another. That's the world of the universities, of course. And sitting right next to the dean of the medical school is the legal counsel for Harvard University. And chairing the meeting is Dr. Arnold Relman, who was the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, who'd refused to publish his article. And so they began to excoriate him for embarrassing Harvard University, for talking about UFOs and ETs and all of that. And so he was completely shocked, and so he called his mother. We all do in circumstances like that. Called his mother, and she said, well, Johnny, why don't you call our family lawyer? Go see our family lawyer and talk to him about what to do about this. So he goes over to see his lawyer over at Ropes and Gray in Boston. Lawyer says, give them anything they want. They wanted to have tape recordings of any of the interviews he did, whether he billed them or he didn't bill them. Did they have insurance? They went through every kind of question, this kind of inquisition of him. And he was completely flabbergasted that the lawyer would propose that they do that. Well, it turns out that Ropes and Gray is the attorney for Harvard University. And he said, well, that doesn't seem right. And so he called his best friend, Ron Robertson, who is the head of the art department at Santa Barbara City College. It was an old friend of his from the Air Force back in the Korean days. And Ron Robertson came to me and asked me if I would represent John. Because I'd graduated from the Harvard College, as Jim said, Harvard College and Harvard Law School, and done my master's work at Harvard Divinity School. So he called me to come represent him. And I show up, at the next tribunal session, and they're all arrayed up there on the dais, right? And Relman starts to go after John again. And so I said to him, excuse me, I said, I'm not sure exactly what the nature of this whole tribunal is. It doesn't appear to be an AAUP convened tribunal, which is the Association of American University Professors. They have all kinds of rules about a tenured professor, about the kind of charges you have to make if you're going to threaten their tenure or anything. So I said, but whatever the nature of it is, I'd just like to have you tell us, what are we doing here? And the Arnold Relman said, well, the dean of the medical school here, he said, when you published this book, he started getting a lot of calls, and they were asking him all kinds of questions, and he didn't quite know what the answers to the questions were, and so he decided, why didn't he come and talk with you? And as long as he was going to be talking with you, why didn't he have some of the other people come here, some of the faculty come in too? The same bullshit story that the dean had said to him, right? And here they are in this tribunal with legal counsel sitting next to them. And so I said, oh, really? I said, well, then in the spirit of cooperation, can you tell me who called? Yeah, that was the response. Big dead silence like that. Like, no, just like nothing. And finally, Relman looked at me, and the legal counsel turned to him and shook her head like this. He said, no, I'm sorry. We're not at liberty to discuss that. And I said, well, in the further spirit of cooperation, can you tell me what were the questions that they were asking that you want the answers to? Nope. I'm sorry, we're not at liberty to discuss that. And so I said to him, well, let me ask you this. Whatever the nature of this tribunal is, I said, can you tell me, are either one or both of the following fact questions going to be at issue in this hearing, whatever the nature of it is? Number one, does extraterrestrial intelligence exist? And number two, might at least some of these UFO sightings actually be vehicles from an extraterrestrial civilization? At which point Arnold Relman said, well, they're absolutely going to be at issue, and it's totally ridiculous to think that either one of those things is true. That's what he said. Harvard University, 1994. That it's totally ridiculous to think that life might exist anywhere else in the entire universe, right? And so the bottom line is, I said, well, then I should, in all fairness, tell you that John and I just spent the weekend with Lawrence Rockefeller, who has a great interest in this. And Mr. Rockefeller is authorized to fund a complete grand rounds here at Harvard University that will bring in all the different law enforcement people, military officers, school teachers, librarians, all the different people who have seen these, and will present the information to you. And the legal counsel jumps to her feet and she says, absolutely not. We're not going to have these hearings turned into some kind of a circus, she said. So I just reached out and picked up John by the arm and said, okay, John, now it's time to leave. And we picked him up and pulled him out of there. And we went at it with them for 18 months until they finally relented and agreed to apologize for embarrassing him and et cetera. So that was how I, in 1994, after having had my experience in 1977 with the Carter administration, helping to do that major investigation for the Congressional Research Service for the president, I ended up getting to go and interview virtually everybody on behalf of Dr. John Mack, the chairman of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, who was the guy selected by the military to interview their people. And so I go around and got to interview Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs and, Stanton Friedman and virtually everybody. So I was extraordinarily fortunate to get to do that. And when they finally relented, they set up a thing at Harvard that was called the Project for Extraordinary Experience Research. It was called the Peer Group. And we brought in all kinds of people who professed to be experiencers and did all kinds of tests and discussions with them, et cetera. And so I got to meet dozens of experiencers to be able to actually interview them as an attorney, cross-examine them, test them, determine, how credible they were. Some of the people I said, no, that I don't believe them. We aren't going there with these people. We don't want people coming in who are just looking for celebrity so I got to go through that process. And so I ended up being in a situation where I was able to not only do that, but I also was given, as I said, access to the classified portions of Project Blue Book, where I actually got to go into a room with all the files, and I actually got to take these little microfiche out of these little cartons that they had of all their different documents and things, and I put them in one of these microfiche machines, and I saw these photographs of an actual UFO that was actually crashed. It had hit into this field that was covered with snow. You could see that it dug this little trench all the way through the thing. It was stuck in the side of this bank with snow on it, and it was sticking up at like a 45-degree angle. And there's all kinds of U.S. Air Force people around in the photographs, taking pictures of them, and one guy with a movie camera with the two little round canisters on top of it, taking pictures of this thing. And I noticed that there were symbols on just under the bottom of the dome. It was a classic saucer, with a big dome on the top and the big saucer body stuck in the side of the embankment. So I realized there were these symbols there. Now, these two guys that at the door had told me that I couldn't take any notes in the thing, but I had a yellow pad like that. And so what I did is I got the microfiche machine and I focused it down to the inside cardboard of the inside of the yellow pad and opened it up and traced them directly from the photograph onto. So I had them absolutely perfect. I knew exactly what the order was that the symbols were in, what they looked like, etc. And I closed it up like this. And I said, I better get out of here because I wasn't supposed to take any notes. And so I put the little notepad under my arm and I get up and walk out. And I go out and pick up my briefcase with these two suits that were the guards at the door of this place where I was seeing the documents. And as I started to walk down the hall, one of the guys said, hold it. What is it? What is that you've got there? And I said, oh, that's my briefcase. I just picked it up right by the door. He said, no, under your arm. What is that? And they came over and they snatched it away from me and ruffled through all the yellow pages, and there wasn't anything on them because it was written on the inside of the cardboard at the back of the yellow pad. And so they gave it back to me. And so I walked away with this thing and I bring it back to the Jesuit headquarters. And I was a candidate for the Jesuit priesthood at the time, and I was their general counsel at the headquarters, as I mentioned. And so I bring it to Father William J. Davis, who was my immediate superior, and I show it to him. And he goes, oh, here, let me show you something. He bends down, slides open the drawer of his desk, and he takes out this little 8.5 by 11 manila envelope, and he hands it to me. This is at the Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., right? And I open up the little clasp, and I pull out a little black and white 8.5 by 11 glossy photograph of a UFO. And I look at it like this, and I say, where did you get this? And he said, my sister Dodie gave it to me. And I said, well, where did she get it? He said, oh, from her husband, Mike. Mike is the air traffic controller at the Seattle airport. And one of his best friends is a commercial pilot that flies all the way through the Northwest up through there. And he took this photograph right out of the window of his plane. And he didn't want to get in any trouble for it. When he got it developed, he had to bring it to the drugstore and get it developed at the drugstore back at that time. And so he gets the photograph. He said, I don't want to get in trouble, but I'm going to take it and give it to my best friend, Mike, who is the air traffic controller at the airport. So therefore, I've done my job, but I'm not going to get in any trouble. I'll just give it to him. And then when Mike got it, he said, I don't want to get in trouble. So he brought it home, and he gives it to Dodie, and he said, here, bring this to your brother. He's a priest. So what does that mean? What does that mean? What that means is that people have a genuine instinct that there's something theological about this. This has something to do with the entire makeup of the cosmos, the subtle energy realms that are operative in the universe, and that life has been gestated elsewhere in the universe, many elsewheres. And so therefore, we in fact appear to have been gestated from the chemicals and stuff of our planet, that we've been actually raised up from microbiology in our planet up into high sentient beings and are in this teleological progression of ascending into higher and higher consciousness. There seems to be some sort of tractor force that's operational, drawing us on up into a higher and higher degree of complexification. That's according to Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard de Chardin was a Jesuit priest who was a paleontologist who actually discovered Peking man. And he wrote many letters to his sister talking about how he believed that all the evidence led him to believe that, in fact, we human beings are ascending in this progressive teleological way to be more and more conscious. Now, in this interfaces with an experience I had when I graduated from Harvard College in 1967. I went up to Harvard Law School, and I got notified in the spring of 1968 that Professor Crane Brinton, who was the longtime 25-year chairman of the Department of Intellectual History at Harvard University, was getting set to retire after 50 years of teaching at Harvard University, intellectual history. And he was going to be giving his final lecture. And he was asked to talk to the most important single intellectual insight that he thinks that he has uncovered and encountered in his 50 years of studying intellectual history of our human family. And he gets up in front of the assemblage. They had to move it over to Lowell Hall because there were people came in from all around the country to be present for this lecture. And he gets up and he said, I've been asked to talk about what the most important single intellectual insight of our human family has been that I've encountered in 50 years of study. This is easy, he said. I think that all of the greatest minds of our human family have come to the common conclusion that our human family is right on the very brink of evolving into its next stage of development as a species. And that this next step in evolution is going to be manifested in terms of the evolution of a new faculty that our human beings have that is like seeing or hearing, that can directly, immediately, experientially encounter, much like we can through sight, the vibrational frequency of light, and how we can directly, experientially encounter the vibrational frequency of sounds. That we have a faculty that's evolving that is able to directly, immediately, experientially encounter the unitive phenomenon that bonds every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical universe into one unified harmonic whole. And he said that by means of this experience, of this unitive experience, we are able to discern what conduct, human conduct, both individual and collective, is either harmonious with or disharmonious to the natural order of our universe. He said, and I think that's why so many of you young men refuse to go fight in this Vietnam War now. That's what he said. Closed his book and walked off, and passed away within months after that, and never wrote more about it. He shared that sort of in private with the last all-male class at Harvard University to tell these young men who were trained to be the leaders of the Western world this secret that he had discerned. And I think that this is what's happening here. And that what we understand is that if in fact there's another civilization in our own galaxy that may be literally billions of years more advanced than we are, and Teilhard de Chardin is correct that there is some teleological unfolding and of a progressive ascendance in consciousness in sentient beings, that this species may well have been having millions of years more advanced evolution in their consciousness. And this is the secret for our communion. This is the basis of our commonality with the extraterrestrial civilization, that we too are gifted with this particular faculty, this experiential encounter with the unitive phenomenon of the entire universe. It enables us to remote view. It enables us to have telepathic communication. It enables people to engage in astral travel. These are the siddha of the great religious traditions of our human family. These are secrets that have been known for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years, on the part of the evolved species of our human family. And that this is what we're here talking about here at the New Living Expo this weekend. At one form or another, this is what we're talking about. because our human family has, in secret conclave, come to codify these secrets. That they talk about your diet, you're not overstimulating your body so that you overwhelm the subtle evolution of this kind of tactile experience of being able to experience the unitive phenomenon in the universe. That you meditate, that you get to a point of calming the entire energy system of your body and going through the chakras and balancing the chakra energy in your body, etc. These are all secrets that our human family has been codifying and gathering for thousands of years, and that they're now becoming available to us. They're available to us. You could go to a conscious bookstore, and take it off the shelf and sit down and read it. But only a small percentage of our human family does this. And therefore, those of us who have done this have a certain responsibility for sharing this in some effective way with our sisters and brothers, to try to lift up and help to accelerate the evolution of this particular faculty in our human family, so that we can prepare ourselves for an actual encounter with these beings. Because people say, well, why in the world don't they just come in and tell us the answers to these problems? Why don't they give us some new alternative energy source to petroleum? Why don't they give us 0-point energy? Why don't they cure cancer? Why don't they? And I'll tell you what my response was when I got put this question by Lou Elizondo, for a little inside baseball here. We're sitting in Washington, D.C. We just came out of a meeting with the Inspector General of the United States Defense Department. We're sitting with some of the staff people that have been working on this for years. And they put this question: Why do you think? They're asking me, right? Why do you think that they aren't contacting us and giving us help and helping us solve these problems? And I said, you got to remember that there's a story about this young boy, a little boy who loved butterflies. And he collected butterflies, and he had this big aviary place out in his backyard where they could all flutter around in this great big gossamer cage where they could fly around in their natural habitat. And he wanted to find an example of a monarch butterfly. He looked around, he finally found a little cocoon of a monarch butterfly. And he brought it home, and he put it in a little box with cotton batting in there, and he put little lights on it to keep it warm. And he monitored this thing and cuddled it. And it finally, after a period of time, started to go to the point where it was evolving and breaking out of the cocoon. And the butterfly started breaking out of the cocoon and was struggling like mad. And he was watching it, and it struggled and broke out of the cocoon. And it was finally struggling against one last silken thread. It was struggling. And the little boy felt so bad about this butterfly having this terrible struggle that he went and got a little pair of scissors and he just clipped that last silken thread. And the butterfly came free. And it was an absolutely perfect specimen of a monarch butterfly, except that it could never fly. Because that was necessary. It was necessary for it to struggle against that last silken thread in order to develop the muscle structure that was essential for it to fly. And I told that story to these men. They just were flabbergasted, actually, because they'd never thought about that. That in fact, we have the obligation to struggle against the silken threads that we have in fact woven around our culture and around ourselves, to be able to finally be able to fly, to be able to have an exercise and an experience of this faculty, this subtle evolving faculty that will give us access to the union of our entire universe. So that if in fact Crane Brinton was correct at Harvard in 1968, and in fact, this is a faculty by means of the experience of which we can actually immediately and experientially discern what human conduct, individually and collectively, is actually either harmonious with or disharmonious to the natural order of our universe. That's the secret. So thank you for coming tonight. Sorry, yeah. So we've got some time if people have and it's kind of hard to figure out questions in the face of all that. But look, let's take the questions because we have another like 10 minutes.
So what about all the repressed patents and information that have been, with national security that are not allowed to be released, that have some of this free energy and water motors and all this stuff that the government is suppressing?
Well, the fact this raises one of the profound questions, the fact that we have established the institution of a national security state here in the United States from the National Security Act of 1947 that was passed by Congress at the end of the World War II, and that the United States has become a national security state. And it's involved in, by dint of their own internal documents that you can find, that when we got to the end of the Cold War, that Jimmy and I were involved, actually, out of the Jesuit headquarters. Jimmy was the head of the anti-nuclear weapons program at the Jesuit office. And that when we were working at trying to keep, well, at that time they had the SALT talks going on, the strategic arms limitation talks. And all the United States and Russia were talking about is limiting the number of new missiles they were going to be building every year. And we said, that's not a very good way to get out of this problem. What we ought to do is start reducing the nuclear missiles. That's what we should do. And so that what we did is Jim ended up, you'll love this. I don't want to embarrass him, but he was taking a year off. I stayed at Harvard Divinity School. I did my master's work and it rolled on over into the PhD program, and I was going to be working to get the PhD. Jim left to go to Cambridge over in England, where he was studying under J.T. Robinson. J.T. Robinson had taken a year sabbatical, and Jim didn't want to waste a whole year there at Cambridge without having him as a mentor. So he came back to the States and was with us together at the Jesuit National Headquarters working on the issue of nuclear weapons. Jim used to go around shaming all the Catholic bishops into signing the letter to declare the mere possession of nuclear weapons to be a mortal sin, which he actually succeeded in doing, bending their arms. And the bottom line is Jim ended up getting ready to go back after we'd been working on this. He was getting set to go back to Cambridge. We were sitting out on the night before he was getting ready to fly out to go back to England. We're sitting on the front lawn of the National Catholic Cathedral in Washington, D.C. We lived at Arupe House, which is the old Catholic convent at the Franciscan Monastery in Washington, D.C. And we were sitting on the front yard, passing a joint back and forth, which we just happened to find. It just happened to be sitting there, and waste not, want not. And so anyway, we were passing the little joint back and forth, and Jim said, I'm getting set to go back to just finish my PhD thesis after this whole year of doing this extraordinarily exciting stuff, getting to meet with the bishops to get declared, the sinful structures of nuclear war. He said, what am I going to do? I'm going back there. And I said, nuclear weapons. We got to get rid of the nuclear weapons. And I said, here's what we'll do. We'll organize the top 54 major religious organizations here in the United States to try to get the United States to undertake a unilateral cutback in the number of warheads that we have, to cut back, say, 10% of all of our warheads. But it's going to be really important for the Soviet Union to respond, to start this process of de-escalation. And Jim said, okay, I'll do that part, right? Which gives you some idea who you're talking to here. So he ends up going back over. He goes back over to Cambridge, and he's talking to the people there. And he goes to see the chaplain at Cambridge, saying, I just got through spending about a whole year being at Jesuit headquarters. We're trying to figure out how to get rid of nuclear weapons. Can you help figure out what we're going to do this? The chaplain was kind of dumbfounded. He said, I can't really think, but I guess. Yeah, actually, there's a fellow here. Who's writing his thesis, writing a book on the nuclear weapons question right now. And it was not Deepak Chopra, but who was he? The Fritjof Capra, exactly. Fritjof Capra is writing this book about against nuclear weapons, right? And so Jim goes over and confronts him. Said, "I'm Jimmy Garrison. I'm one of the best friends of Danny Sheehan. We're at Jesuit headquarters. Please, we're trying to figure out how to stop the nuclear weapons." He said, "Can you help me?" And he's going, this is the damnedest thing. He said, but actually, I know this woman, Mrs. Rose Cruz. that who in fact her husband was a brigadier general, and one of his best friends is the head of the Royal Academy of Science in Britain. And what I'll do is I'll introduce you to him. And so she did, and what they did is Jim went around and got a letter of introduction from every one of the members of the Royal Academy of Science in England to give him a letter of introduction to their counterpart in Russia, in the Soviet Union. And so, and then he said, okay, I've got to do some more research on this. I figured I got my thesis down, I'm getting it published as a book. I'm going to do some research on Russia. And he, much to his surprise, decided, wait a second, if you do the investigation on Russia, they're not going to invade anywhere with the ice caps or try to take over the world. Their ass is getting ready to fall off. He said, you know, so he writes this book called The Myth of the Soviet Threat, and he takes a copy of his book, and he's got his letters of introduction, and Mrs. Rose Cruz gives him a grant to go to Russia. To go over there. So Jim flies over to Russia, and there he is in Red Square, and he's got his book under his shoulder, and he's got the letters of introduction, and he's got this grant. He's going, okay, I better start. So he goes around one after another to the different heads of the different science departments of the Russian Academy of Science. And they say, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't do anything. And the next guy says, I can't do anything. Finally, he runs into a guy who says, oh, well, you know, I don't know what to do, but I've got a very dear friend of mine who's the doctor for Brezhnev, who is the president of Russia. And Brezhnev has a bad heart, and he's not going to last very long, so his doctor goes to see him all the time. And so what I'll do is I'll tell him that you want to get a message through the Brezhnev to see if we can try to figure out how to have them respond to our nuclear, if we cut back 10% here. So he goes and he talks to the guy, the doctor goes and talks to Brezhnev, and Brezhnev authorizes Jim and the doctor to end up putting together a documentary film in Russia. And they do a 3-hour documentary film in Russia about what the consequences would be if one single multi-warheaded nuclear missile from the U.S. were to land dead center in the Soviet Union. Of all it would contaminate and kill everybody and poison the waters and everything else. And so they did that. And then Brezhnev dies. And Andropov comes in. And so Jimmy's getting said, hey, I better go see Andropov. And so he's talking to Shevardnadze to say, here, can you set up a meeting to go see Andropov? And Shevardnadze says, no, you don't need to talk to Andropov. He will not be here that long. You know, what you need to do is you need to go see Gorbachev. You need to go see Gorbachev. He's only the Secretary of Agriculture, but he is KGB. He is the protege to Andropov. He said, and he's the guy that you need to go see. So Jimmy sets up the meeting to go see Gorbachev. Goes to the Kremlin. Jimmy and I are sitting in the hot tubs down in Esalen, and passing a joint back and forth. There was another one just laying around that was right by where we were. And so we said, what is this thing? And we said, there's only one way to find out, right? And so we're passing this back and forth, and he's telling me the story about how he goes to the Kremlin to see Gorbachev, right? And there they come in, he goes into the Kremlin, he's got these big 20-foot high doors, and he goes into the Kremlin. He goes in, I'll leave out the part that's controversial. So he goes in, he sits down with him basically and tells him, look, my name is Jim Garrison. I'm a good friend of Danny Sheehan. We're the Jesuit headquarters. And we need to have you, we want to get a unilateral cutback in the number of missiles, warheads of the United States, but we need to have Russia respond. Gorbachev says to him, U.S. will never do that. U.S. will never unilaterally start cutting back like this. He said, they think they need to have the nuclear weapons, not for us, not against us, China, he said, that China showed them in Korea at Incheon that they can put 1 million men into uniform against the United States in a traditional war. And there's nothing the United States can do about it. So they believe they have to have the nuclear weapons. So they will never take the step to lead this. I'll have to do this. When I become president, I will do this. I will take the step and I will start to cut back on the nuclear weapons. He said, but they will come for me in the night. They'll come for me in the night. So you have to become the president of the Gorbachev Foundation and work to stop the nuclear missiles in this world. That's how Jim Garrison, sitting right over there, became the president of the Gorbachev Foundation. Okay, so the moral of this story is that the people who are in charge of the national security state of the United States government are not going to do the right thing because they are, in fact, the aggressors. they are committed to projecting U.S. military power across the world in 800 military bases around the world. And they are dedicated to, per their own documents of the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document, draft number 2, says specifically that the whole purpose of this, they want to create a brand new a Northern Industrial Alliance, a new Northern Industrial Alliance, which will include the United States, Canada, Mexico, not the Mexican indigenous people, but the PRI, which is the Spanish, Castilian Spanish party down there. And then the UK, France, Italy, Spain, and Russia. Russia, if they'll agree to join, now that they've spun off all of their ethnic provinces. So what does that tell you? That's all the Caucasian nations of Western power to organize together. And the purpose of this new alliance, this new Northern Industrial Alliance, will be to be able to maintain our continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials needed by the member states of the new Industrial Alliance. That's what they said. That's the aggression that they're engaged in. And so that we have responsibility here as 6% of the population of the entire human family to disassemble this sinful structure of the national security state here in our United States, so that we have to work on this together. And we have to deal with this by helping to raise the consciousness of our people to be able to work peacefully, without aggression, without hatred, without resentment. We have to be able to organize and lift up the consciousness of our people to disassemble these sinful structures that we find ourselves in the midst of. We are citizens of Rome, the modern Roman Empire here on our planet. And we're blinded to it from being inside it. It's hard for us to perceive it. But the fact is, it is true. And so fortunately, the Jesuit order of the Catholic Church, the largest single denomination in all of Western civilization, knows this. And they're engaged in this process right now. And so I would suggest that what we do is we try to communicate with whatever spiritual tradition we are part of, and try to get them to understand that we have a dual responsibility, not only to raise our own consciousness by attending to our own spiritual health and share these secrets with everyone else, but also at the same time to address the sinful structures of our country. We have to disassemble them, and we have to reach out for peace in the world, because that is the only way that the extraterrestrial civilization is going to say, here, we cannot come and save the young boy. We cannot save him from the trauma that he has to go through to have this butterfly break out of that last silken thread. We have to break the silken threads, as I said, that we have woven around ourselves and around our culture in order to qualify for citizenship in the galactic civilization. So that's it. That's 8:30, and I appreciate you coming. Oh, and for anybody who would like them, we have these pamphlets, these little flyers that we'll give you, and you can reach out to us. You can reach us at the Romero Institute. You can help us. You can volunteer to work with us. You can come and see us. You can donate any money that you happen to find lying around, like this, and help us out.